Welcome back to the Show My Scars podcast. I'm your host, Derek Duker. Today I bring you a conversation with John Reed. John is the Director of Tutis Online over in Kidderminster, a town in the UK. Tutis is a nonprofit that focuses on reducing loneliness and social isolation in both elder care homes and prisons. He does this through telling stories, music, holding poetry workshops, comedy, or simply chatting. I met John through friend of the podcast Rustin Pangburn, founder of the Why Not mindset, of which I'm a part of. Anyway, I'll let John tell you all about himself and what he does now. Here's my conversation with John Reed.
I'm an open book. Ask whatever you like.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about the work that you do, and you call it your social enterprise.
Yes.
And you say that aims to reduce loneliness and isolation through the storytelling and, of course, poetry and comedy and conversation. I wanted to
Yeah.
know what first inspired you to do that and why the focus on older individuals and prisoners.
So if I go back to 2016, I took a social enterprise course. Now, for those of you around the world who don't know what a social enterprise is here in the UK, the easiest way of putting it is to say it's a limited company, which normally would have shareholders, and it has shareholders in the UK, but it's a not-for-profit. So we have to promise to use some of the profit that we make, instead of giving it to a shareholder, to provide some of our services free of charge to those who can't afford it. So I went and did this training course. And during the training course, one of the ladies on the group said to me, "John, you're a really good storyteller. Have you ever thought about storytelling in a care home?" And I never had, Again, care home in the UK is for the older generation where they live out their days, and they might need a bit of help with their, with looking after themselves. And so I had a guy following me on Twitter who was an activities man for a chain of care homes. So I wrote to him and asked him if he'd like me to give it a try. And of course he said yes. It was free. It's part of my social enterprise. So myself and the lady that had, Caroline, that had suggested it, pitched up to this care home in Birmingham, central England here. I told the story of my mum and I, and it went down very well. There was a group of about 30 people, half of whom had dementia. And so it didn't matter to them whether the story was true or not. And I could have probably done the same story every day and they'd have enjoyed it every day. But at the end of it all, the activities coordinator suggested I might try it again, but with music this time, because music is a good way of getting through to folk with dementia. And so I went back a month later and I took my mum out of the equation. I just did my life story with the music that related to me as I was growing up. Well, I was born in 1948, so the music when I was a teenager was in the 60s. And I know you weren't alive then, Derek, but in the music of the 60s, which I'm sure you're familiar with, in the UK was the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and all that kind of stuff. And in the 50s, it was all big band stuff, which you would be more familiar with. So Frank Sinatra and Tony, whatever his name is, who died recently, I can't remember his second name, Tony Bennett, all that kind of stuff, And it really went down very well. And I wrote about it on Twitter. And the governor of Leicester prison, Leicester is a city in the UK, wrote to me and he said, "Did I think it would work well with prisoners?" And I said, "Well, I don't know because I've never been in a prison." So off I went to Leicester one Saturday morning and I took the story of Elvis with a great big cardboard cutout of Elvis, a load of Elvis tracks. And of course, because I'm in a prison, you guessed the one I've got to play, in Jailhouse Rock. You couldn't possibly go into prison and not play it, could you? And when I arrived there, the officer that met me for my protection said to me, "John, we're working in the SEG today." Well, I'd got no idea what the SEG was, being as I'd never been in a prison, other than that one brief visit. Turns out SEG stands for segmented in the UK. And this is where people who are naughty within prison are sent as punishment. So you got the naughtiest of the naughty all in one place. And here am I with my cardboard cutout telling them about Elvis. And I'm sure you know the Elvis as well as I do, the Elvis story. And it was party time in the SEG, really. I had men dancing up and down the aisles, prison officers laughing. The whole event was wonderful. And the feedback after the event was simple. The men loved it. But unfortunately, that particular prison hadn't got the budget to afford to pay me to go back in. And so they recommended I go to Stafford Prison. Well, Stafford is another prison we've got here in the Midlands, which is small by your standards. It's got 750 men in there, but it's one of only 4 in the UK, which has only one class of prisoner, and that is a sex offender. So going into there was a completely new experience for me. So again, I went in with the story of Elvis, and they've got a very nice church in there. So in the church, we got about 50 inmates, half a dozen prison officers, and again, it went great. They loved it. Party time in Stafford. And from there, I got a contract to go in regularly. And that's what started me on the old people, because the fastest growing, to this day, the fastest growing sector within the prison population is the old people. And it's because we had a guy here, I don't know if you've heard of him, called Jimmy Savile, who was a revered TV presenter, did loads of work for charity and used to present pop programs on the telly and everything. I grew up with Jimmy Savile. But after his death, he was exposed as a sex offender. And had he been found out before, he never would have been allowed to carry on. He even went into hospitals and worked as a ward orderly, and obviously his taste in little boys was extreme, to say the least. But what it did, it made people realise that as a sex offender, you could be caught out. If you had complaints made against you 30 or 40 years after the event supposedly took place, then you could still be called to court and maybe convicted of it. And lots of people have been. And there are some very, very famous cases. In Stafford Prison, before I went in, there was a guy called Rolf Harris who came from Australia and made a really career doing kids' TV and various productions. And I grew up with Rolf Harris and thought he was great, He was a portrait painter. He even went and painted a picture of our late Queen, and he was a very well-respected guy. But he got locked up for it as well. So, yeah, that's how I got into it, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, and how do you see the storytelling, the music and humor helping to alleviate the conditions of loneliness, depression, and anxiety within the prisons and the old folks' homes?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Derek, I didn't think of this in the first place. I come to learn that this was the major benefit of doing it. So when they first introduced me into Stafford, I went into what they call the SSG, the Senior Support Group. So it was all men over the age of 65 who, if they were living on the outside, would be retired. And when I went in there to meet the men, there was about 60 of them in the area. They're all sitting about, not looking particularly happy, not looking particularly sad, looking a bit bland, really, reading papers. Every time I went in there, they'd sit me down and give me a cup of tea and some toast, because the inmates got all that as well every morning. And I come to learn that and if you think about it, it makes sense, If you or I were sent to prison, that first night especially, but probably for all of your sentence, you're really not sure of the system. You're not sure of who's your friend and who's not your friend. And it becomes the loneliest place in the world. So even though you're surrounded by people, you feel lonely because you've got nobody close up. It's not like being at home when you might have family around you or friends around you or work colleagues or whatever. So that's how the loneliness starts off. And loneliness we see now as a gateway mental situation, mental health problem, really. If you do nothing about it, then it tends to grow and develop. And first of all, it goes to depression. Then it goes to anxiety. Then we find if it goes untreated, it turns to self-harm. And eventually it turns to suicide in some people. So we try to think of a way around it. And what it amounts to is, and if you think about it, it's such a simple solution. If you can develop a friendship with somebody and be their friend, when they need you, they are no longer lonely. Now, if you're married, if you're living at home like I am with my wife and kids, they're family and friends. So if I'm depressed about anything, I can go and talk to them anytime I like. In fact, my wife poked her head in the door here just before you came on air and I started recording this. But if you've got nobody, where do you go then? So in I come, and I do a variety of things. Now, to be honest, Eric, it could be anything. But what I found myself, we had in this same prison in Stafford, they had quite an innovation, really. They had what they call family days. So they had normally visits is for 2 hours maximum. and it might be one or two people allowed in at a time, and you might get to do it once a month. On a family day, you get a 6-hour period where lunch is served in the middle of it, where the children can all play together, where mum and dad can chat at length, and it's a much more user-friendly situation. And so I got asked, would you like to bring your music in, John, and play some music for the kids? So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I took my amplifier and iPad and so on, got a load of music off Spotify, took it in, and away we go. Turns out my taste in music is not the same as the prisoners, so they got to choose the music after a while. And you get this kind of a friendship. It's not a close friendship. It can't be, can it? They're prisoners. They're serving a prison sentence. They might have done something terrible. But I always make a point of saying to them when we first meet, listen, I never want to know what you've done, and I never want to know how long you're in for. I'm interested in speaking to you man to man, not in any other way, just as man to man. And they seem to accept that immediately. And as we get to know each other, because we're going on a regular weekly basis, we get a kind of a friendship developing. And they share their fears and worries, and it tends to drive down depression, anxiety, loneliness, all that kind of stuff. And I've had men walk in, with bandages all around their arms. And when I say to them, knowing what they've done, I say to them, what have you done there, son? What's the matter with your arm? Have you fallen over and broken it or something? And of course they haven't. They've taken the blade to it over the lunch period. And because I'm joking with them, they've never had this acceptance of the problem at all. Because a prison officer will put them on remand or something. He'll send them to the SEG. You're not allowed to do that, or put them in the hospital, in the prison, or whatever. But if you go up to them and laugh and joke, and you've got that kind of friendship, it's worth its weight in gold. And they can see that, a number of things they can see. Number one, I'm not a young man, am I? I'm not a kid wandering in there. I'm certainly not a prison officer. I'm not a tool of the establishment. I'm somebody who doesn't mind bending the rules. When I go in, I take tea, coffee, milk, sugar, biscuits, you name it, I take it. Anything legal. But an awful lot of what I take in is not legal in a prison. But nobody ever stops me. So, so I take it. I did a poetry writing course the one time. And I took every man who came on it, I took them in a writing book, the kind of thing that you would buy. Well, I got them off Amazon, but the kind of thing you see at school, and a pencil to write with. And I thought, well, if they write something worth talking about, the pencil's going to go blunt. So they better have a pencil sharpener to sharpen their pencil again. Not thinking it was illegal. So I'm entering the prison and my bag goes through the X-ray machine. I've got nothing to hide. If somebody had said to me, oh, you can't take them in, oh, fair enough, then take them out. I wouldn't know. But nobody ever stopped me. And if somebody needed a pencil sharpener, I gave them one. But I think by the time I'm handing out pencil sharpeners, the men I'm giving it to know me and trust me, and they don't want to get found with it in their cell, so they hide it. And I've never been told off for it ever. And another thing I take in is milk. So I go in the supermarket on the way to the prison in the morning, and I get a big 2-litre bottle of fresh milk. And of course, the milk they get in prison is in cardboard boxes and long life. It's horrible. So I go in with some nice cold fresh milk. The men love it in their tea and coffee. And then at the end of the day, if there's any milk left in the bottle, I hold a competition for who wants the milk. Of course, they all put their hand up. And I thought they just liked milk. It was my view. So I ask them a question. Whoever gets the question right gets the milk. And I did this for months and months and months until in the end, one of the officers said to me, what do you do with the milk bottle at the end of the day? And I said, well, I'll give it away, of course. Whoever likes the milk can have it. And turns out that they don't want the milk at all. They want the bottle. And the reason they want the bottle is they want to make hooch in it.
Oh, no.
And they're not allowed to make hooch. And they can't make hooch unless they've got a container. Well, dear old John's going in and giving them a container. No wonder they like me. So I'm not an expert. I'm not an experienced prison officer. I know lots of things, but if I take my friend Ed in with me or any other lived experience guy that knows the prison a lot better than I do, then they tend to be very protective. And I do loads of silly things. There you go. That's just me.
Was there any fear when you first, were asked to go into the prison? How did you immediately open your heart and accept these folks?
I never, ever It's a lie. I once was in fear, but only once. A lot of it is because I'm naive and I don't see the danger. So if you don't see something, you can't be scared of it, can you? But the one time I did, I was a little bit wary. I don't know if the words I use will fit into an American prison, but we have like 3 stories generally in a prison wing. And generally it's a long rectangular wing with cells either side and a gap in the middle. And in the gap in the middle is wire netting. So that if anybody on the 3s, as we call it, the top level, if they were to jump, they'd fail absolutely because they'd be on like a trampoline, you know. And one day I was on the 2s, like the floor below, and a guy was on the half landing, like stairs going down to it. And I knew him very well, and he was a very well medicated schizophrenic. And as long as he was in prison, and as long as he was taking his medication, he was fine. And he taught me more about schizophrenia than I ever knew in the past. But on the ones lower down, there's a guy there. This is lunchtime. It's all quite quiet. There's a guy there shouting his mouth off. I don't know what he was saying. He was just making a load of noise. So me being me, I shouted at this bloke, "Hey, keep the noise down." And the bloke stopped talking and started walking towards me. Actually, the guy's name was Derek Leonard is his name. And he turned around to me on the landing and went, "Yeah, go, go, go."
Oh, no.
And so I took myself off behind the door, locked myself safe. I didn't come to any harm. But clearly I'd offended this guy. But generally speaking, you can do whatever. I do loads of stuff. The one day I was on the 3s, and a guy that is now a really good friend of mine, currently serving 15 years for rape, but when I met him, he was on remand, and he was staring down the length of the wing and looked very solemn, and I didn't know him at all. So I just walked up behind him and slapped him on the back. Well, he could have been anybody, couldn't he? Stupid thing to do, really. And he turned around and looked at me, didn't smile, he just looked at me. And all I said was, "You all right, mate?" And he went, "No, no." I said, "Oh, what's the matter?" He went, "Oh, nothing." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm here doing some poetry this afternoon if you'd like to join us." "Yeah, I'll see." Yeah, he was very down. Anyway, he turned up at the poetry and he's turned into a really good friend. I know his wife and his family. I keep in touch. I write to him every Sunday by email. And what he told me many months later was that the moment I slapped him on the back, he was contemplating suicide. And what he was thinking was, however illogical it might sound, he was a very, very wealthy man. He'd sold a business for some hundreds of millions of pounds. The money was in the bank. He'd retired. He's now 60 years of age. He's got a wife and 4 daughters at home. He was thinking that if he finished it off, if he killed himself, his wife and children would never want for anything. Sooner or later, they would stop missing him, and maybe his wife would even marry again, who knows? And that suicide would be the best option. And I feel quite pleased that I slapped him on the back now, although at the time I wouldn't have had the vaguest idea. But I suppose the simple answer to your question, Derek, is I'm not frightened of anything I see, really. And I suppose that's what drives me to go in again and again. They are the most fascinating places. You meet the most interesting people. I never want to know what they've done, but sometimes they tell me anyway. Or sometimes I might overhear a conversation and cotton on to why they're there. So, yeah, interesting places.
I can't remember if I read this on your website or you told me about it, but there was a music and chat session in prison that resonated with an older inmate, and they became noticeably more engaged the second time you visit. And I guess this could be about just about anybody you run into, it sounds like, but what do those experiences teach you about the power of human connection?
What it teaches me is that we're all the same. These people have made bad choices, but at the end of the day, they're people the same as you and I. Everybody, you, me, the rest of the population of the world, has probably got a song that they remember more than anything else. So if I say to the men, right, if you've got a favourite singer, tell me who it is. And when I come in next week, I'll not only bring a lot of his music or her music in, but I'll tell you the story that goes with the music, with the person. And they seem to love that. So everybody's got a favourite Elvis song and everybody likes the story of Elvis. They might not know it. But I say to them, get the music going in the brain so that gives them a warm feeling inside that cheers them up a little bit. But poetry does the same. So I get them writing poetry about what concerns them. And an awful lot of people will write about what they've left behind, the life they've left behind. So I'll read you a poem that kind of puts it into, it's not a big poem, that puts it into perspective for your listeners. And the poem, the prisoner has called the poem, Where Will I Go? And it reads like this. Where will I go once out of here? Will I live in comfort or hide in fear? I really don't know, as that time hasn't come, as I'm still stuck inside for the crime that I've done. I deserve what I got. I can't complain, leaving someone with nightmares and causing them pain. I wish what I did never happened at all, and I would be forgiven and left standing tall. It all came down to the drugs that I took. No, I'm not given the time, not even look. Deep down inside, there's only me to blame, and I pray openly no one else does the same. Wow. Poem full of remorse. He realises what he's done is stupid, and I've had loads like that. And perhaps when we get towards the end of this, I'll read you another one.
Yeah.
But it seems to resonate with a lot of people. But actually, when you walk in prison in the first place and you meet a crowd of men and you say to them, anybody want to come and do a bit of poetry with me? They scorn you. They look at you as if, you're some kind of stranger. Mm-hmm. And, well, I'm a stranger, really. And initially they go, nah, I think so. Thanks all the same. And then they realise there's some good quality tea, coffee, sugar, milk, biscuits, cake, maybe. I sometimes take a bar of chocolate in and run a competition. Whoever writes the best poem gets the bar of chocolate. And honestly, it's amazing what they would do for a bar of chocolate. It's quite incredible. But it's a subculture that I don't claim to fully understand because I've never been a prisoner. But I've got a few prisoners around me that will join me now. They've served their time and they're out. So, for example, when we did the conference, we had a ex-prisoner in the room talking to the people. And Rusty's wanting to do that all over again. So I'm up for that. Do something unique, something that interests people, On the outside, if you said to somebody, do you want to come and learn how to make a video? They might very well say yes, because it's something they've never done, or a podcast or whatever. And they're no different inside. If you offer them something different, they go, oh yeah, well, I've got nothing else to do. I might say to them, are you busy that day? And they'll go, well, I don't think I'm going out that day. No, as if they were able to go shopping or something. You have to do it all with a smile on your face.
One thing that resonated with me when talking with Rusty is that we've all made mistakes. And he said something to me the other day that I'm going to butcher now, but it was something like, don't let the worst decision of your life be what defines you for the rest of it.
It would be your worst nightmare, wouldn't it, if you were sent to prison?
Right.
You can't imagine it. But you can imagine it, right? So when you get a spare minute, imagine in the smallest room in your house, you're sentenced, and that's where you live. In that room is a bed, a toilet, and a table. You might have a window, if you're lucky, at high level. You can't really see out of it. If you're really unlucky, or lucky, depending how you view it, you might have somebody in there sharing the room with bunk beds. But you've got to stay in that room 23 hours a day. Your food is passed through a slot in the door, and you use the toilet. And if there's two of you in there, you both use the same toilet. There's a curtain around it so the other man can't watch you doing what you're doing. It's inhuman. So the punishment is being taken out of circulation and imprisoned. That's the punishment. The punishment should not be mental torture. I always say to people, if I had a dog and the dog bit me and I was really hurt and I said to the dog, you bounder, I put him in his kennel and I left him there for 2 hours, hoping he'd learn the lesson. And when I opened the cage door again, out he came and bit me a second time. And it's the same with prisoners. So unless we do something while they're in there, unless we do something to rehabilitate them, when they leave, 90% are going to go back and do it all again, depending on the crime, depending on their age. So I've met plenty of murderers, for example, that have done 16, 18, 20 years inside. The reality of leaving is that the world they're going to is not the one they left. And if you think to yourself, what was life like for you 20 years ago? Think in terms of the mobile phone. Think in terms of the internet. Think in terms of the food you ate and how you got your food, where you were living, what entertainment was on the telly. Did you go to a cinema to watch a film, or nowadays you would stream it in, wouldn't you? There's so many things that have changed. And in my lifetime, and when I talk about when I was in my teenage years and an apprentice learning my job, the men just think it's medieval. You know, I would go around on my bicycle, riding my bike from one job to another. Nowadays, the engineers would have a van and a load of spare parts, and off they'd go. There are so many differences. So if you were locked up today, like my friend's been inside now for what, 3 years, 4 years, something like that, but it's a 15-year sentence, and he'll have to serve at least 10 of it. So by the time he leaves, his girls will have grown up, life will be completely different, and he'll be more tuned to prison life than external life. Now, he, I know, won't ever go and commit another crime ever. He'll be, and the vast majority of sex offenders, reviled though they are, and many of them should be because they've done horrible things, they themselves feel so guilty and so embarrassed about what they did that once they leave, the chances of doing it again are much lower than if it's, say, a house burglar, or a drug dealer. I mean, somebody like Rusty, that was a drug dealer. When he comes out, there was very little stopping him going straight back into business and carrying on doing his dealing until he got caught again. He chose not to. He had the mindset to work it out. But lots of them have got no choice. They just go and start doing it all over again. And I was with a guy last week who said, as he was growing up in Liverpool, it was a very rough area of Liverpool. And his dream, his idol, the man he wanted to be, his peer, if you like, what he really admired and wanted to become when he was old enough to have a proper job, was Pablo Escobar, the Mexican drug lord.
Oh, no.
And sure enough, as he grew into it, he became a drug dealer. And he worked his way up the business. And in the end, he was a huge, important drug dealer. And this went on for years. And he kept getting banged up for it. And he kept getting released. And then he'd do it again. And this went on until one day, police arrested him and took him down the police station and put him in a cell, a holding cell. And as they were putting him away, he noticed on the cell next door was a list of names, and they were all family members. His mother, his brother, I think there was a couple of kids on there. And he asked the policeman, why is all my family listed up here? He thought it might be something to do with visits. And they said, no, because of what you've done, you couldn't have done it without their knowledge. So we're pulling them in as well. Oh. And he said, for me, that was the end of my career. He said, because it's one thing me being locked up, it's an entirely different thing family being locked up on my behalf. And so I did a plea deal with the court that I took a bigger rap than I should have done. But all my family got just a suspended sentence. And then once I came out, I've never been back. And now he runs a really successful business, because if you can grow a thriving drug cartel business, he used to fly down to Mexico and pick up stuff and bring it back, and all manner of things. A more likable man you couldn't wish to meet now. The only thing about him was, I asked him if he was a Liverpool Football Club supporter, and he said, no, he's an Everton man. I said, in that case, you can clear off. I don't want anything to do with you. But, he just laughed, whereas years ago, he might well have just punched me on the nose or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know better than I do. I bet them the merits of football fans and what they get up to. And
oh, yeah.
I know.
They can become a crazed bunch, that's for sure.
That's right.
To all my listeners out there who are business owners, listen up. A report from Stanford says 75% of consumers admit to making judgments about a company's credibility based on their website's design. So, what does your website say about you? If your website could use some work, you need Two Oddballs Creative. Web development is much more than just how a site looks. It's also how it performs. Your website needs to be quick, user-friendly, and direct consumers to performing your desired action. If you want to learn more about Two Oddballs Creative and why they're trusted by some of the biggest brands in the Springfield, Missouri area, head on over to twooddballs.com. That's the number 2, oddballs.com, or you can give them a call at 417-986-6332. If you're a loyal follower of the show, you probably remember an episode I've done with Rustin Pangburn. He was the gentleman who was working on a reentry program for formerly incarcerated folks, and he now has a book out called Mindset Matters: From Incarceration to Transformation, a Journey Through Life Experiences and Lessons Learned Along the Way. You can find it on Amazon. Just search Rustin Pangburn, that's RustinPangburn, and that title again is Mindset Matters. This book is more than a personal story. It's a guide for anyone who is searching for a way forward, whether you're overcoming your own setbacks, seeking a fresh start, or trying to support someone who is. Mindset Matters offers hope, practical advice, and an unshakable reminder that change is always possible. So go purchase your copy of Mindset Matters by Rustin Pangburn over on Amazon today. What are your main challenges? I know you said earlier, I think you were talking a little bit about funding, but is there other ones like access, policy, stigma, and how do you navigate those?
There's no stigma to it. My family and friends think I'm mad, but I do it anyway. They can't imagine. And when this first started off, when I told my son, I've got two boys. The one is 51 this year and the other one's just 48 now. So when I first went into prison, I told them where I was going, to the sex offenders prison. And I can't tell you the reply, but they thought I was absolutely stupid. But I've got hooked on it. I'm addicted to going into prison. And it's because of the quality of the stories. I'm a storyteller, really. And because I enjoy doing that, a source of stories is where I want to be. And these guys are, they are firmly based in stories because lots of them have done things I would never dream of. And interestingly, the last time I was in Stafford, probably a couple of years ago now, that my contact on the staff there used to recruit the men for the poetry course. And I would take these men, 12 at a time, into a classroom. It was just me and 12 men. I mean, if they'd wanted to harm me, they could do. They never did. And it was the last group of the series. And she said to me, John, I have to tell you, she said, that there is a transgender lady in this group. So I said, yeah. And she said, is it okay for her to join you? I said, of course it is, yeah. The person, isn't she? She's human. In come 11 men and one lady. And quite a bright lady, although you wouldn't necessarily think so. So at the end of the first day, I said to the guys in there, right, gentlemen, time's up. You can all go back to your flat now, back to your pad, your cell, whatever you want to call it. I'll see you next week. Cheerio. And they all filed out. But when I turned round, this one lady was stood. And all she said to me was, can the girls go as well, John? She had a sense of humour.
Yeah.
But as the weeks went by, she gradually wore more and more female clothing. And she had false boobs and everything. She had makeup on her face and turn up in a skirt. And yeah, it's not my bag at all. But would I hold it against her? No, of course not. I don't disrespect her or anything like that. In fact, she said to me, would you help me write a poem? And I said, yes, of course. Who's it we're going to write about? Or what's the topic? And she said, I want to write one about my mum. I said, yeah, all right then. Tell me about your mum. Tell me about your relationship, and I'll know the kind of poem to write. And she went, I hated my mum. My mum used to hit me. She said, I told her when I was 7 that I was a little girl, really. And my mum said, no, you're not. She started hitting me with a cricket bat and God knows what else. She had a terrible childhood. So we wrote a poem reflecting that hatred that she had for her mother. And the next week, she asked me to write another one. And I said, who is it this week? She said, me dad. And I said, is it the same as last week? She said, oh, yes. He was even worse than my mum. So this little child that was growing up really confused with their own sexuality had parents who thought they could beat it out of her. And of course you can't. It's like saying to a gay man, you're not really gay. You're just imagining it. It's obviously rubbish, and I wouldn't say it to anybody.
For other people who want to start something similar to what you're doing, where do you think that they should begin, and what training, partnerships, or permissions do they need?
I can only speak for the UK. I don't know what America's like on this respect. We have a form called a DBS form, which you have to apply for through the government. And effectively, it looks at your history. So if I had been a criminal, it would have shown up on my DBS form. But because I've never been a criminal, obviously mine is nothing at all. It might show where I live now, who I am, what school I went to, that kind of thing. But it's basically saying that you're an honest person. But you then need to gain access to the prison. Now, if you go to them as an unknown quantity, there's no chance of you even walking through the door because they'll think you're going there for some ulterior motive. So the thing to do is start wherever you can get a start. So I didn't realise it at the time, but the work I did in care homes and then tweeted about, it's X nowadays, isn't it? But I used to go in a care home, do an hour or so in there, probably for free. Sometimes they paid me, but generally it was for free. I enjoyed it as much as they did. And you perfect your act, really. You perfect what it is you like doing, because if you don't like doing it, they're not going to like listening to it, are they? So I kind of practiced on them. And as you probably know, Derek, I do a little bit of stand-up comedy now. So I practice on my audiences. And then if somebody in prison says, go on then, give us a bit of stand-up, I do. But it's a very dangerous thing to do because, again, I don't know about your prisons, but in our prisons, you cannot make jokes about sexuality. You can't use any swear words. You can't talk about religion. There's so many jokes that you're not allowed to tell. That the stand-up routine I do now would never work in a prison because they just throw me out. So to answer your question properly, find yourself somewhere where you can practice. Now, most care homes, and I'm sure Rusty would tell you more than me, most care homes, if you go to them and you speak to the activity organizer and you say, I've got this idea, I'd like to introduce a poetry group or a reading group or a singing group or whatever it might be. Can I come and do it one afternoon? They will say yes, because they won't leave you alone with the residents for obvious reasons. They won't pay you, but it will enable you to perfect what you're going to do in prison. And if you tweet about it or Facebook or whatever you want to use, sooner or later, somebody will notice what you're doing. And funnily enough, I was talking only this morning with Rusty. We're talking about video on LinkedIn. I'm going to start doing video on LinkedIn because it's apparently the best way of reaching biggest audiences because of the way the algorithm is handled. So I'm going to start doing videos soon and see if I can get the story out of it. But it's about, do people recognize you? It must be the same for somebody who wants a career on stage and screen, somebody who wants to be a famous film star. They've got to get noticed first, haven't they? They might be the best singer in the world, but if nobody hears them singing, that's the end of it.
Have you ever had to deal with any self-doubt, or, have you ever doubted the value of what you do? And if so, how do you push through?
I doubt it most days. Yeah. I find it quite difficult to understand why people like what I do. And over here, we call it imposter syndrome.
Yep.
I can't believe that what I'm doing, which is to me is so easy and natural, people are actually thinking, God, that's clever. How do you do that? So yes, Sunday, my oldest son has just been married 25 years and he held a garden party for his silver wedding anniversary. And a number of the people there know that I do stand up. And so I was telling them when next they could come and see me. And some of the stuff that I didn't tell them all the jokes, but some of the topics I'm going to cover, and they're all laughing and joking, and that about it. But I just encourage them to come along and so. By the time I perform a story, a funny story, I can't really tell jokes. By the time I do a funny story on stage, I've said it so many times in here, sometimes to the camera, sometimes just to me talking to the wall, that I know it off pat. But one guy said to me on Sunday, he said, I could probably do this, John, but you do 15 minutes, don't you? I said, yes. He said, well, how do you remember it all? And the answer is simple. I've done it so many times. It's repetitive. It's not the same every time because it comes fresh every time, but it's the same story. So just get a bit of inspiration, watch a little bit of YouTube, find some funny stuff in there that makes me laugh, adapt it for me, and then deliver it. So there we are. Would you like to finish on another poem or a joke or both?
Oh, we could do both if you've got time.
Okay, so we'll start with the joke, shall we? So I went down a supermarket recently and I wandered around the supermarket and I bought a number of items, including a tin of dog food. And when I got to the counter to pay for it, the woman said to me, you can't buy dog food. And I said, why not? And she said, because you haven't got a dog. I know what you're going to do. You're going to feed that meat to the kids and tell them it's beef. And I went, no, it's not true. She said, well, if you can prove you got a dog, I'll sell you the meat. So I went home, got the dog, took it back down the shop. She went, oh, fair enough. See the dog, and sold me the dog food. A week later, I went back and I bought again a range of groceries, but some cat food. She said, you can't have the cat food. Why not? You haven't got a cat. I've got a cat. You have not got a cat. I've never seen your cat. I said, I have certainly got a cat. I'll go and get it and prove it to you. So I went home, got the cat, put a harness on it, walked it back down the shop, showed the cat to the woman, and she went, oh, okay, fair enough. Sold me the cat food. The following week, I went down with a plastic bag in my hand and went into the shop and wandered around the shop buying bits and pieces, as you do. And when I got to the counter, she said, what's in the bag? I said, put your hand in. So she put her hand in the bag and she said, yeah, whatever is that? And I said, I'd like to buy 2 toilet rolls, please.
Oh, no.
That's just, that's the first one that comes to mind. Let's have a little poem, shall we? Men are always thinking about when they get out, what home life's going to be like. Will it be like the home they left or whatever? But this is a reasonably long poem. Take me a couple of minutes to read it. But this is one man's thoughts of home. When I am lost and lonely and the world seems so unkind, I think about my dearest one and I see her in my mind. It gives me peace and comfort to think of the one I love. She brings me joy and happiness like an angel from above. At times I'm overwhelmed and my world is full of fear. I close my eyes and speak her name, and soon she will appear. It gives me strength to carry on and get through every day. To know the one who gives me hope is never far away. I think about the way she moves, so full of style and grace, and I think about the beauty of her warm and tender face. I remember our wedding day, though that day has long since passed, when we said our vows together and swore our love would last. I remember walking on the beach and paddling in the sea when I told her that I loved her. She told me she loved me. I don't need to be near her to feel her in my heart, and though we may be parted, we will never be apart. Whenever there is tension, I just walk away and smile, for I know the one who gets me through will be with me in just a short while. Nothing makes me happier than her in my mind's eye, for I know that her image represents a love that will never die. Every time she appears to me, my heart begins to swell. I love her more than I can say, and more than words could ever tell. I wish she could be here for real, so I could hold her in my arms. But until I do, I'll think of her and the memory of all her charms. I thank her every evening and reach to turn out the light for getting me through the day just gone and helping me through that night. Without her, there would be just sorrow in a world of pain and tears. But her love is what's helped me survive through these long and lonely years. How sad is that?
That's so hard to hear somebody be that lonely, and I would have to imagine that's what keeps you pushing on.
It gets you here. I've read that many times, so it doesn't have the same effect now as it did the first time I read it. But it is a wonderful poem, and they often write funny poems as well, and that makes me smile. I had a guy in a prison once who was a double murderer, and again, I didn't want to know what he was, but I overheard a conversation he had with another prisoner, and he told the other prisoner that he was coming to the end of a 21-year sentence, which itself had followed on from a 5-year sentence for grievous bodily harm. So he'd done 26 years in prison, and he was only 18 when he first got sentenced. So he spent more of his life in prison than on the outside. And he wrote some wonderful poetry, but he wrote one about the day he did the murder. And it turns out it was a double murder. He shot 2 people on the same day, and they both died. And he was full of remorse. Of course he was. And the poem basically said, although I killed those men, they didn't suffer. I've suffered for the last 21 years, but I'm not alone. So have his partners, his family, my family, everybody around us who knows us have suffered. People have been scared of me because they think I might do it again. I'll never do it again because I'm so full of remorse. I'm such a different man now to what I was then that, everyone's safe now. But how he would get on in the outside world when he left, heaven only knows. He would need an awful lot of support because, well, one of the first guys I ever met inside was an ex-army guy, artillery. He'd parachuted into bloody Afghanistan and shot people, and done some really terrible stuff. Got PTSD, got himself addicted to cocaine and drugs and alcohol. And said to me, John, as long as I'm in here, I'm safe. But if ever you see me on the outside and I've had a drink, stand well clear. He said, I'd fight anybody. But inside prison, he was a huge benefit to me because he used to stand by me as much as he could. He was like my henchman, If anybody had come looking a bit threatening, Lee would have put one on him and that would have been the end of that. So I'm never scared, really.
How do you think this work has changed you as a person?
I think it's made me more tolerant and more understanding. I think I've always been an open book. I think I've always worn my heart on my sleeve. And sometimes that's an advantage and sometimes not. So many, many people in my life have taken advantage of me because they can. So my wife would say, John, you're silly. You trust people until they hurt you. My wife does the opposite. She's wary of everybody until they prove their friendship. And actually, that's a safer route. But you're born a certain way on this world, aren't you? I'm made the way I'm made. And so I think it has changed me for the better. I think I'm way more tolerant of people. The transgender is a good example. 10 years ago, I doubt I would have reacted the way I did on that occasion. For no reason, only that you don't understand, if you're walking down the road and a man's got a dog on a lead and the dog sort of goes, bares its teeth at you. You don't really know whether it does it to everybody and you're in no danger at all, or whether one moment of slippage on the lead and the dog got hold of your leg or something, You don't know, do you, until you live the experience. So, I'm a little bit wary, but not really. I'm still an open book, really. And in prison, it helps because you can see men with prisons, with problems related to life that happens to many men. Prostate cancer is a good example. I've spoken to so many men about prostate cancer. I've not had it myself, and hopefully, touch wood, I never will. But it's a lottery over here. Anybody could catch it, and it's probably genetic. And on the outside, we get tested for it on a regular basis. But in prison, if you said to somebody, I'm a bit worried I might have prostate cancer, they might laugh at you, or they might hold it against you, or, whatever. So it's all part of the loneliness thing, isn't it? Yeah. So I talk to men about it. I make them talk about it, bring it out into the open, especially if there's a woman prison officer in the room. Get her to join in because she'd like to have a husband or a partner. And they'll be of a generation, Men over the age of 50 should be aware of this problem and do something about it. And if they do, then they're likely to survive it. But, we're men, aren't we? We're rubbish at going to doctors. I say to the men, if my wife had a lump on her breast, she'd be down the doctors like an Exocet missile. She'd be straight down there and she'd want the doctor to have a look And is it serious or should I do something about it? We're blokes, we are. If we get a lump anywhere, we just go, oh, well, it'll go away, Don't worry about it. We're fine. And it's the same with mental health, isn't it? Are you all right, mate? Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, not really. But unless you probe them a bit and talk to them, you can't easily get to the bottom of it unless you're a friend, if you've got some kind of a relationship with them. And I suppose that's what I do. Present myself as a friend, get to know them a little bit, share my life with them, tell them loads of stories. Some are true and some are not. So I sometimes say to them, when you were doing your crime, surely every now and again something funny happened. And some of them will go, well, yeah, it goes wrong sometimes, doesn't it? Every job goes wrong sometimes. So this one guy said, oh, yeah, I had a right situation. I said, what was it? He said, me and my mate, he said, we used to go out on trading estates at night. They're not very well lit. And we'd go out looking for vans that were open. And we'd either steal the van or if it had anything of value in it, we'd steal the contents. So we're mooching around this trading estate, pitch dark, come across this van, try the back door, and hey presto, the door opens. He said, inside, there's a man and a woman making love. I said, what did you do? Did you clap out of time? That's what I'd have done. He said, no. I said, what was the reaction? He said, well, the woman quite enjoyed the intrusion. She was thinking this is another dimension. We've never done this before. But the man was well put out by the situation. He climbed off the lady and chased us down the road. And, it was all quite funny, really, because, Confucius him saying, man with trousers down can't run as fast as man with trousers on properly. So we made our escape.
John, I appreciate you coming on and talking with me. How can people get a hold of you and support what you do?
Well, via you, of course. They can contact me. The easiest way is LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, I am John Reed Tutis. So it's JOHNREEDTUTIS. Or you can hand out my email address, which I know you've got. You can give it to anybody in the slightest interest that would like to have a conversation, have a Zoom meeting, whatever. I've got all the time in the world. I don't work full time. So anybody that I can help, very willing to do so. And I've got to say, Derek, thanks for your time. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise.